All right. Hopefully people can see. So direct routing, the whole thing is broken up into three parts, right? Today we are gonna do the first part of the series, which is defining what is direct routing, when to use it, and how to plan for it. And then tomorrow on our first session, we are gonna talk about configuration and management of direct routing. And on the next session, we are gonna talk about migrating to direct routing, right? Give me just 1 second. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. And Ash, I just sent you a text a message if you can take a look. Okay, so let's go with what is direct routing and when do we use it. So right, when we look at an enterprise voice in the cloud, I think this is very straightforward. So I'm not going to talk. Not going to spend a lot of time about it. We know Office 365, the hub for teamwork, some of the marketing stuff that we have, but then we have Teams, and then what we discussed in the previous session, that you have the chat and IP meeting, the chat and IP meetings that you can do. Then we added audio conferencing. Then you have PSTN calling, which is what we call the phone system, right? That's what you see here, the phone system. And then we discussed to connect to the phone system where you're able to make PSTN call. You need to have either Microsoft calling plan, you either need to have operator connect, that's got discussed, or direct routing, which is what we are going to be talking about today. Those are the three ways you can connect. Now, if we focus on direct routing, then this is how the environment might look like, right? Very similar. I had a similar slide on just the previous session, right? You have the user. Let me get my. You have the user right here. He or she is connected to Teams in the cloud. That is in turn connected to the session border controller. Now your session border controller can be inside your internal network. It can be a hosted one in the cloud, either on AWS, on Azure, or on with a telco vendor, doesn't matter. Wherever they are, we just have to connect to that session border controller. That session border controller in turn can be connected to analog devices if you need to make phone calls to analog devices, because Teams can't directly call analog devices. It has to go through a session border controller. And it can also be connected to PBXs if the customer still has PBXs around. And at the end of the day, it is also connected to the PSTN through the trunk, so that it's able to make PSTN calls out, right? So overall, this is how, at a high level, the direct routing environment looks like. Now, what are some of the key benefits of direct routing, right? One of the key things is the interoperability with third-party systems, right, which is the PBXs or third-party voice applications or analog devices. All of these things that Teams can't connect directly, I can do it by putting SBC in the middle. Then the next is your existing contracts that you have with your service providers that might be still servicing your PBX users. Nothing needs to be changed. We don't need to do anything. Your contracts continues. Your investment into your on-premises voice infrastructure continues, so you can do the depreciation that you need to do every year, so you don't lose out money, and no shareholder can question why did you invest money on Teams when you just invested $10 million 3 years back for your PBXs and for everything else. So everything else continues. At that point, it becomes add-on benefits for the users as they slowly get migrated to Teams from PBX. With the help of Teams calling and with what do you call it, the SBC, by default everyone gets a single DID, right? So no more that I have extensions. Those are things of the past. Everyone gets their own DID. Or DID, for anyone new to the term, is direct inward dialing, right? That basically says that I have a phone number that is M360, not M365, Jesus. What is that? Scott, help me out. What is that? The format of the phone number that we try to do when we are
the E164 format?
E164. I said M365. Jesus. Yes, that basically a DID means that my phone number that I'm providing is a E164 number compliant, meaning that it's a unique number and any person in the world who is connected to the PSTN network can actually dial that number and I will then we'll be able to get to me. Like the same as an IP address, which is unique, same thing with the E164 number says that I should be able to be reachable by anyone in the world as long as they're connected to PSTN. That's not the case when you have obviously extensions because extensions are not E164 compliant. I can't just dial an extension number without dialing a previous number and adding the extension at the end of it, right? So with Teams, it's always DID. All right, then where calling plans are not available, I think that's a no-brainer. If you have calling plans are obviously easier. You do not have to maintain the SBC or anything else. But again, you can use this, as Scott mentioned, as either just where calling plans are not available, or in certain cases, I had customers where the same user had both a calling plan and direct routing plan enabled with them. Because
so, yeah, let's break that down for a second, though. You can, when you mix them both, your calling plan maintains control of the inbound, but you can dial out via either the calling plan or via direct routing.
That is, thank you for pointing that out, right? So there are some quirks. Now, why will user use that is because if you're trying to save money, if in situations for international calling plans are phenomenal. Right, direct routing can save you money if you have PBXs that I can transfer the call. Let's say I am in the US and my users calls, I don't know, Paris constantly, right? And now if I don't have a PBX that I can transfer the call before the call egresses out in Paris, all the time I call a user in Paris, I am paying international call charge, which is very expensive when you are using a normal traditional system. With calling plans, international calls are bought in bulk, so it's much cheaper. So at the end of the day, from a technical standpoint, as Scott very correctly pointed out, your inbound call, if you do decide to use both calling plan and direct routing, your inbound calls are always going to be processed by calling plan, but your outbound calls are going to be processed by, and I do have a slide that goes over how does Teams determine which one to use, but depending upon what the user is trying to dial, it will be able to utilize the correct service. Okay, obviously less hardware footprint, right? I mean, because for Skype for Business, you needed the Skype for Business servers. Now you don't need anything at all. You just need the SBC, that's all. So service numbers, we discussed about service numbers earlier, right? These are the ones where you either can port your own service number or you can take one from Microsoft, but it has to be hosted by Microsoft. And service numbers are used in situations where you have a high concurrency of high occurrence of, high concurrency of many calls coming at the same time, right? And you can bring your own or you can get one from Microsoft. So let's talk about planning, right? So one of the first thing into planning for direct routing, and this is am I gonna own this SBC or am I gonna have a telco provider host it for me? And all the major telco providers who are our partners do have a hosting model where they will be, having, multiple SBCs service actually multiple customers at the same time, right? So these are called the hosted SBC model. And then you can decide that, I am going to bring in an SBC and bring it in-house, keep it in my network, and that is obviously the self-deployed. Then you have to talk about licensing, then you have to talk about the actual session border controller that you're going to buy, or then you have to figure out if you're going to be doing it self-deployed, then you have to figure out what are the FQDN you're going to be giving, which we are going to go through. All of these we're going to go through now. The FQDN and the certificates that the SBC needs, the IP ranges and ports that needs to be opened up on the firewall, the voice routing that you need to set up, and then if you're going to be enable media bypass or not, right? So all of this comes to play. Let's take a look. So on the, this thing is covering my writing. Sorry about that. When you get the PowerPoint, please bring it down. So as I was saying, right, self-deployed versus hosted, it's up to you, it's up to the customer to figure out what makes sense to them. Both has its pros and cons. Obviously, if it's self-deployed, then you have full control on the SBC. It's in your network, so it's fully secured. It's not going, the call is not, even if it's outside of the network, let's say it's hosted, they actually pull up a VPN channel to your internal network. So it's going through an encrypted channel, but still it's going through the internet, right? So you have a little bit of security considerations at that time, and it's self-deployed, it's not. But on the other hand, when it's self-deployed, now you have to buy it, you have to manage it, you have to maintain it, you have to know how to configure it, you have to update it, right? You have to troubleshoot it. All of those additional work comes out, right? So again, depends upon what the customer wants. There is no one size fits all. Self-deployed or hosted, both works, depending again what the customer needs. So this is why I didn't realize that there is a certification program from Microsoft. Microsoft now certifies which SBCs are certified. So I will update this slide. My apologies, I didn't know that we actually give certify SBCs. That must be something pretty new. And I am getting old, so I'm not able to keep up with all the changes. I'm not as young as Scott. Licensing, right? Licensing is licensing, right? Depending upon what they need specific licenses, right? The Microsoft Phone System license, and then E5 or E1 or E2, and then the add-ons for audio conferencing and for phone system. I will leave licensing to you for you to kind of go in and take a look and figure out what licenses are required by that specific customer. But let's look at the technical things, right? So let's go in a little bit into details. What exactly is a session border controller, right? Unless anyone has questions, I mean, I can go over it. As I said, it's a voice firewall, right? It provides connectivity, obviously, because as you can see, it's a glue in the middle. It connects. If you have, say, for example, you're doing a migration, there are Skype for Business users still in the environment. There's PBX users in the environment. There are other third-party providers, that are other third-party applications in the environment. There are analog devices in the environment. And then there's PSTN, and then there is Teams. So all of these are glued in with a session border controller, right? So it is obviously the glue in the middle. Now, this slide obviously apparently is no good, because we said the certification is validated by a third-party lab, but apparently right now we do it. So this slide is not good anymore. But let's talk about the FQDN requirements, because I did see that someone was asking us to what are the FQDNs or certificates that you need. So one of the first things, obviously, for me to connect, me meaning Teams to connect to the SBC, it needs to have an IP address and a name, or a name and then an IP address. So because we are connecting over TLS, we will need to ensure that it can do certificate-based authentication. So sorry, not authentication, you can say certificate-based validation, right? But for us to do it, obviously, it needs to have a certificate, and the certificate needs to have an FQDN, right? So one of the first things to understand before you give it the name, when you create a tenant, the default tenant that gets created when you create a brand new tenant is start.onmicrosoft.com, because start can be whatever the tenant name is. The onmicrosoft.com is the initial tenant that gets created. Now, and then you create all these vanity domains like Contoso, Europe.contoso, Americas.contoso, whatever other vanity domains that you want. But guys, hold on for 1 second. Let me just tell my kids to keep it down a little bit. Guys, can you keep it? Sorry about that. So one of the things to understand when you are naming and this is obviously you are self-hosting, when you are, because when you are hosting it by a third party, you don't have to worry about all of these. But when you are self-hosting, the name that you want to give cannot be a name that is using on Microsoft.com. That is actually not routable. So no on Microsoft.com that is going to be available, but you can use any name from any of the vanity domains, right? So you can see we can, like, the root domain in this case is like contoso.com. You can create, whatever name you want. If you now create another sub zone called, subdomain called europe.contoso.com, you can also have sbc1.europe.contoso.com. To the SBC, it doesn't matter, right? Because it's not following Active Directory. There are no domain structures it's trying to follow. So the name is absolutely just the name and nothing else, right? So don't make it complicated. Give it a name. The only thing is it cannot be an on Microsoft.com domain. And then obviously it needs an IP. So you basically create a certificate with this name, and that's all what you need to do, and apply it and put it into the SBC. Now, what type of certificates can you have, right? And specifically because customers always have multiple SBCs for fault tolerance purposes. They might have multiple, regions or sites where they need SBCs. So there might be quite some certificates that you might need. And sometimes customers wants to go in for what do you call, these are called wildcard certificates, right? So with a wildcard certificate, what happens is that I have one subject name, but then I add all of the individual SBCs, whether, SBC1, SBC2, SBC3, SBC4, all of these gets added as a subject alternate name. But I have one subject name. And then what I do, I will get that certificate. Let's say I have 4 SBCs. In this case, GW1, GW2, GW3, GW4. I will have one certificate with GW1.contoso.com, for example, is the subject name, and have the SAN entries of the subject alternate name for all the remaining 4. Then I need to apply it on the first SBC, and then I need to export it out along with the private key, and then import it with the private key into the second SBC. Then export it out again from the second SBC with the private key, and so on and so forth. That's how I need to do it, right? So one of the benefits that it used to be is that it's cheaper, because certificate providers before, or majority of the times, used to not charge for cost or not charge customers extra for subject alternate names. Right, so customer can have 10 subject alternate names, but only buy one certificate, and they save money because certificates are expensive depending upon who you're getting from, or what is the length of the not length, what is that thing called, the validity of that certificate, right? But then there are some cons also, because now you are constantly importing and exporting it out. When the certificate expires, now you have to do that same process, and it means downtime, and do the process again for all the 10 SBCs that you might have. And then because you're importing and exporting it out, there are some security issues that might come in play. Obviously, the most secure option is to get a certificate, each individual certificate for each of the SBCs. And now the way all the certificate providers work, they as it is charge for as if it's a single item for every subject alternate name. So it doesn't really matter for majority of certificate providers. It's just better off just getting a single certificate for each of your SBCs. It's more secure, less work, and also you can update them individually without having to keep importing and exporting it out. Make sure, let me just open up the chat to see if there's any questions. Saying is that like there are different ports and firewall requirements depending upon where is the tenant located. Is it in our commercial client? Is it our commercial tenant, which majority of our customers are? Is it in the GCC only which is, and then you have the GCC high and then DoD. So depending upon which customer you're servicing, the ports might be different. And I have the deck, we'll have all the ports, but we'll just go through one. And the idea is to discuss the technology and what we are doing, and then exact port requirements you can find on the deck. So this one is the most common one, which is commercial and GCC, right? Now in this one, you can see there are a few things, right? We discussed SIP proxy, right? Everyone knows SIP proxy, what that is. Everyone knows media processor, what that is. Everyone knows the SBC as to what that is. So you can see what are the signaling ports that you need and what are the media ports that you need. And if you need to lock it down by source port and destination port, you can also lock it down, right? So for example, this is from the SIP proxy, meaning from the cloud coming to your SBC. You remember this was the SIP proxy that was in up here in the cloud, coming to your SBC, which is down inside your network. The source port on the SIP proxy is 1024 to 65, basically the whole range. And the destination port is whatever you define when you are creating the SBC, which majority of the time it's 5068, but you can define whichever port you want. So whatever port you define, that's the destination. Now on the other way around, from the SBC to the SIP proxy, the source port is what you define on the SBC, and the SIP proxy is only listening to 5061, right? Then when it comes to media, because the SIP proxy only deals with signaling when it comes to media, and if only media bypass is disabled, meaning the media has to be processed by the media processor, then only these are going to get into play, right? We understand that. So you can see from the media processor, which is in that range of 3 subnets that we have provided earlier, that includes not only media processors, but also transport relays. But from the media processors, there's these, I don't know how many ports are here. Those are the source port and then destination port. If we keep normal, which is 5068, from the SBC going back to the media processor, right? So let's say someone is calling inbound, then the SBC has to send the media to the media processor. If media bypass is not enabled, then it's going to be, these are the same ports that the media processor is listening on. And on the firewall, right in front of the SBC, there are some FQDNs that it needs to be able to connect to. That's SIP.PSTN, hub.microsoft.com, SIP2, SIP3, and these are all the, the SIP proxy IP addresses. So you don't need to open up to any IP. You are only opening it up to these specific IP addresses. That's all the SIP proxies that we have. And the media processor ranges are right here. So even from those 3 subnets, if you just want to narrow it down, you can narrow it down to these media processors, only these 2 range. Now I will throw a question. I see media processor. Why don't I see anything related to transport relays? Think about it. We can discuss that at the end. So why am I not also showing what are the ranges for transport relays that I need to connect to? We'll discuss it at the end. Okay, so this is commercial and for the GCC cloud. Let me see if anyone has any questions. Yes, the Viraj, yes, we will have. If I am sitting on the internet and I want to make a call, and if I have media, and if the firewall doesn't allow from any IP coming to the SBC, then I will have to bounce off the transport relay to your question, right? So, okay. So let's move on to GCC, right? So we discussed, did I again close the sharing? Sorry about that. So this is what you need for Office 365, commercial cloud and the GCC high. Then the next slide talks about GCC high only, if you only have GCC high. And as you can see, the ranges are much less because of the fact that you do not need to have, we don't have that many GCC high customers compared to the number of commercial customers that we have. Then we have the ranges for DoD, the Department of Defense, and so on and so forth. So that's all about SBC, how to set it up, how do you define the name, how do you host it, and how do you give the certificate, what ranges and ports on the firewall that you will need to open. So let's take a look. Next is how do I set up the actual voice routing for my phone calls. So this is a very important, because this is where we talk about voice routing policy, we talk about PSTN usages, we talk about dial plans, we talk about voice routes, we talk about trunks. So the crux of calling is what we're going to cover next. Okay. So before we dive deeper into voice routing, I want to step up a level and talk about all the various configurations that I just mentioned, that the various items, right? Voice routing policy, PSTN usage, voice routes, gateway, dial plan. So on the left-hand side of this slide, you will see the three items: voice routing, PSTN usage, and voice route. These components are what we call the anchors that we use to configure the actual voice routing component that I'm going to talk about more in the next couple of slides. These pieces together are going to encompass what we commonly refer to as a class of service and a class of restriction. What do I mean by class of service and class of restriction? For example, I may have a set of users that are allowed to dial like any number that's out there. Doesn't matter if it's international, doesn't matter whatever the number is, right? You can dial local, international, whatnot. And then there may be different set of users that can only dial domestic, or maybe only dial local numbers, or maybe only dial like a lobby phone where you can only dial 911, right? You don't want someone sitting in your lobby, a guest, and making expensive international calls just sitting over there. You might be just keeping it there for calling internal numbers and only for calling 911, right? So that is what is called a class of service and class of restriction. So these three together defines that what is the class of service and class of restriction the specific user is allowed to do and allowed not to do. On the right-hand side, we have other configuration objects at play. Dial plan helps us to define and capture the user's habits of dialing, right? So what I mean by that, think about users who are coming in from the PBX environment and might be used to dialing 5 digits for an extension. He might be dialing his best buddy up in the PBX wall by dialing a 5-digit number. The PBX at that time actually converts that 5-digit number and has the logic to figure out what actual user is this user trying to do. But as I mentioned earlier, 5 digits is not an E164 format. That only works when you are sitting inside of that PBX or PBX environment. But now that the user has moved to Teams, he might be not happy if he is not allowed to utilize the same habit that he has used for the last 50 years, which is dialing the 5 digits to call his friend. So to keep the user happy, we can actually capture all these dialing habits and put that logic inside of Teams, inside of dial plans, so that the user even on Teams can dial 5 digits and still be able to go to the right user. And then we have the gateway as the last section, right? Gateway is basically the session border controller. It is a representation of that session border controller that has been put to service, right? A lot of time Microsoft refers to as a trunk. So if you're going through a Microsoft doc site and trying to learn, you will see we keep talking about trunk. If you look about PowerShell commands that you can do, it talks about trunk. A trunk is nothing but a gateway or a SBC that is in service. At the end of the day, a gateway and trunk are effectively the same thing from a logical standpoint, right? So think about that's our SBC, right? So at the end of the day, again, this is class of service, class of restriction, and this is dialing habits, and this is at the end. Once we decide, can the user make the call, and the dial plan says what call the user is trying to make, then we figure out which gateway the call should be allowed to go out, and the call then goes out to PSTN. Now, usages or PSTN usages is a very, very interesting creature, because PSTN usages, because you guys remember there are three things in here: voice routing policy, PSTN usage, voice route. We are going to talk about PSTN usage because this is the glue that holds this and this together, right? So if you just build up a usage, right? So sorry, what I was saying, that the definition of a usage is that it specifies, as we discussed right now, the class of the call, and oftentimes we'll make that something like an internal call, long distance, should it be considered an international call, and so on and so forth, and figure out which user is allowed to make that call, right? Now, if you just build a usage, that right here is literally just giving you a text value that, hey, this is internal, or this is long distance, or this is international, right? But nothing else. For this to be usable by a user, it will take this PSTN usage, and let's say it's a local only PSTN usage that it determines this user is only allowed to make local only call. But now it will need to associate that with a voice routing policy, which then gets assigned to that user. So now my user, let's say his name is Bob, has a voice routing policy which says that he's allowed to make a local call. I figured that out from the PSTN usage, that he's only allowed to make a local call, right? That's great. But then that usage of local only needs to be assigned to a voice route, so that the voice route can actually route that call to a specific SBC and send the call out to PSTN by only allowing the local call, right? You might have an SBC just assigned to local calls only, because you have a lot of users, they make a lot of local calls, they call their wives, these and that. So you might have an SBC just for local calls, right? So depending upon what is the class of service the user got assigned, the voice routing policy is going to then allow you to connect it with the PSTN usage and put it in the correct voice route, so that the call can then go out with the right PSTN. Okay, so one of the things I want to say, that you can have multiple usages, right? A person can have multiple usages, and the order in which the usages are listed, and I will show you on the next slide what I mean, is critical, because once we find a match through these usage combination, we are not going to go through the other ones to figure out if any other ones matches. So depending upon how we kind of order them in the Teams admin center, for example, it can have some unintended consequences. So you really need to be careful about that. So let's take as an example of what we mean. So in this example, what is this example doing? Hold on, let me take a look. Okay, yeah. So in this example, the requirement is that we have for our users to be able to only make calls to US and Canada numbers, right? Meaning we are saying that you are not allowed to dial international. On top of that, we are saying that, hey, you are in Redmond, where Microsoft headquarters is, and Redmond has two area codes, 425 and 206. So we are also saying that because there are so many users dialing local numbers, we are going to have dedicated SBCs only to service 425 and 206 numbers. And we want rest of the US, which might be still local calls, to go out a different SBC altogether, right? That's the whole scenario. So you can see on the left-hand side, what do I have is that I have a PSTN usage, which basically says that I'm calling it US and Canada, which basically says that I am not allowed to make to make a call to anywhere international, right? So we specifying that it's a local only or US and Canada only. But then I am also specifying using my voice route. I am also specifying that what is the number pattern that has to match before I can send out that call, because I specified that I have a 425 and 206. So this is called normalization rule. You can set up these normalization rules for specific number patterns. So what I am setting up over here, I am saying in my voice route that I am only going to be allowing any number that starts with 1, followed by either 425 or 206, followed by 7 digits, right? And if it matches, then is the only time I'm going to use the voice routing policy that is defined and send it to SBC1 and or SBC2. In this case, I'm having 2, so I can do round robin if I want, or I can do failover if I want. But I think it by default it does round robin. Alex or Scott, let me know if I'm mistaken. I think by design you will do round robin if you have more than one SBCs defined in the routing policy. But besides the point, the idea is that for me to be able to restrict and that call going out in here is by putting in the specific normalization rule that I am matching against. Now you can see now I'm expanding that because I am now expanding and adding to another voice route, and I'm calling that US and Canada, even if the first one I called it Redmond because it only had Redmond area codes that I am looking for. But now I am also adding in another number pattern that says I'm going to be looking for +1 followed by any 10 digits, which is any US and Canada number, right? And I am now specifying that they need to go through either SBC3 or SBC4. And one thing that's the thing I was mentioning earlier, that the route order is also very important because I have a priority 1 and a priority 2. Because if I dial 425 followed by 7 digits, that actually also matches the number pattern that's in here. But because this is in priority 1, any 1425 or 1206 followed by 7 digits will always gets processed by this one, which is my intended SBCs. Anything that doesn't match here then gets evaluated by this second number pattern. And if it gets matched, then it will go out SBC3, SBC4. If someone's trying to dial international number by dialing 011, whatnot, none of them is going to match, and the user is going to get a fast busy signal and they're not able to make the call. If they're making anything else, 1 followed by 11 digits, then the number pattern is not going to match and they're going to get a fast busy. So you can see how you can utilize the normalization rules to actually be able to define what call and what number you are accepting, and then you can decide how to route the call. Questions from anyone? Making sense to everyone, I hope. Okay, so the next one is some examples of dial plans, right? Dial plans, again, are ways by which we can capture a dialing habit of a user. Now, do we actually need to do that? We used to do that a lot during Skype for Business world, where this whole, Teams calling, Skype for Business calling was new to users. They wanted to maintain their 5-digit, 3-digit, 7-digit dialing plans that they had, because that's what their users were used to. But then as you move towards what we call the legacy PBX to a newer way of dialing, over time, very quickly, people understand that I don't even have to remember 7 digits. I don't have to remember 3 digits. I can just find the user on Teams contact, right click and make a call. I call Ash, I call Alex, I call Steve, Melissa, Scott all the time. I don't know what number they have. I don't need to know. That's the whole idea, because it's called a contact dialing and not a digit dialing. And that's the beauty of Teams, where you can just do contact dialing and not digit dialing. So the whole idea of that, I am so used to dialing, 5 digits, 7 digits. You still have to remember what was the 5 digits for Bob compared to what are the 5 digits for Alice. What is the 5 digit for Gunther and whatnot. With Teams, you don't have to do that. So once you show those users who are really hell bent on using 5 digits, 7 digits dialing, and you just show them how you can just find the user on Teams, right click and dial, that takes care of it. Keeps your environment much cleaner. The less dial plans that you are adding, the better you are. But if you absolutely have those scenarios where, for whatever reason, customer is hell-bent on using specific dial patterns, obviously at that point, the only way to do it is by using these type of normalization rules to be able to accept what the user is trying to do and then figure out, okay, 3-digit Boston extension, what does that mean, and provide the translation pattern and everything else. But to my point, push your customer towards the contact dialing, name dialing, and where they don't have to remember any number. Environment much cleaner, much easier to manage, much easier to troubleshoot at that point. Okay. So when we look into dial plans in Teams, right? Obviously, you can create your own, but there are 3 different types of dial plans that are available. The first is what we call a service country, a service dial plan. These are assigned based on the service country that is assigned to the user when you create them in the admin portal. Meaning, this is like if you specify that this user is in the UK, there is a UK specific dial plan along with the normalization rule that gets automatically assigned to that user by default. If it's a US user, the US user one, and you can very easily go into your tenant and see it, but the US user always gets this, the service country dial plan that is there is this, and 911. So those are the only 2 that gets assigned by default when you are in the US, because this is how all the US and Canada users can dial each other. So that is available by default to all US users. This 911 and then plus 011, which is the international one, those 3 are all there. So basically, it's allowing you to make it easy on you, because we are saying you don't have to create custom dial plans. You try not to create custom dial plans. We still have to tell Teams how to figure out what number should be going, how to normalize the number. So that's why you have those normalization rules, but with the service country one, Microsoft is providing the base ones to you, unless, and if you need custom ones, you then build it on top of that. Then you also have the option to add what we call tenant level dial plans. So these can be customized, whereas the service country dial plans cannot be changed, right? And that's maintained by Microsoft. And when it comes to your custom ones, you can create a global tenant dial plan. Let's say there is some specific one that all your users use and you need to capture it. You create a tenant global dial plan, and then which then basically applies to your entire organization. If you need to have a user level dial plan, a user specific dial plan, then you can also create a user specific dial plan and apply that to the specific user. Now, I do want to say that there is a hierarchy involved when you have multiple dial plans assigned. And it's very important to understand that this dial plan or this hierarchy works different when you introduce the tenant dial plans themselves. So if you have done nothing and you just simply created some users, enabled some users, and then you went and configured direct routing, and that's it, then you are just by default only using the service country dial plan, right? Then there is no change, nothing happens. That's the only thing that you have. But let's say if you are going ahead and mucked around and you created a global dial plan and you have created a few normalization rules in the global one, and or you have created some tenant level dial plan, then what's going to be happening is that we will actually be merging the service country dial plan along with the tenant dial plan, or we are going to, or the tenant user dial plan, and actually merge it together, right? And then we will apply it to the user, right? So that's something that you have to understand. This always stays, that's the, and then followed by what you are creating, they get merged together, and that's what is the resultant set of dial plan or normalization rules that the user gets, which is very different than Skype for Business world, where it was a hierarchy. What you put on the top, if that matches, then it's going to use that. In Teams, it gets merged and it's not a hierarchy anymore. All right, so let's take a look as to how this works, right? To kind of, I think this is going to bring this together. So let's take a look at end-to-end voice routing basics, and let's bring this together, right? As I'm saying, so here's the scenario. I have a user in Teams, and the user is located in, say, Netherlands, and there is something he wants to make a call to one of the Redmond users at 425-555-1212, right? Again, a user in Netherlands trying to make a call to a US user by dialing 425-555-1212. So when the user goes to make this call, first thing we are going to go and check is if the user has been assigned a voice routing policy. Because if they haven't been assigned a voice routing policy, then we don't have any way to route the call through direct routing, because the voice routing policy is that anchor point for us. That's going to help define the class of service and class of restriction, and will also determine if that user is able to make the call, right? So now, if no voice routing policy is assigned, then we know for a fact that I can't make the call through direct routing. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean the call fails, because you remember we discussed that a user can have, for outbound routing, can use both a combination of direct routing and Microsoft calling plan. So if the user doesn't have a voice routing policy, then we go ahead and check if the user has been assigned a calling plan or not through Microsoft, right? So in this instance, if the user do not have a calling plan, then we can't go through direct routing, we can't go through calling plan, and then the call fails. But if the user do have a calling plan assigned, then the next thing that we are going to check is whether the calling plan includes domestic only or domestic and international. Because the user is in Netherlands and trying to call a US number, meaning he or she is trying to make an international call. So if it's only domestic calling plan that the user has, meaning he or she can only call, say, within Netherlands or whatnot, I don't know what domestic in Europe means, then the call is going to fail. He or she can't make out the call. But if it's allowed for international, then the call is going to be allowed, and the call is going to go out through Microsoft calling plan, right? Now let's go back and say that, okay, there is a voice routing policy that actually exists, right? Then what we are going to do, that we have now additionally, that means that we have additionally configured this user for direct routing. Well, now let's take a look at the voice routing policy. We are going to go look at the PSTN usages in order, and we are going to look at the routes that are associated with those usages to see, hey, do I have a match? Because I have to have a match for this number pattern before I can figure out which route to take, right? Again, if I don't, because this is some digits, if it doesn't match any of the normalization rules that I have in my dial plan, whether it's just the service dial plan or a merge of tenant global dial plan along with service country dial plan, or a user specific dial plan, it has to match the normalization rule. So once if we don't find a match, then it's a fail, and then we go back to calling plan. But if we do have a match, then it tells me, because the voice route is going to tell me which SBC the call is going to be going out to, so that the SBC can then send it to PSTN. So we will go to those SBC or SBCs, If the SBCs are online, then the SBC is going to take the call and send it through direct routing. If the SBCs are not online, then the call is going to fail and the user is not able to make the call. Right? Okay. So that is actually my last slide.